First off, I really would like to thank you for you being here. I mean, you just made it. You all made it against all odds, and I am very excited, really, like literally and metaphorically, because we do have so many distinguished guests among us today. We have so many luminaries and also dignitaries from town. First off, we have like now Honorable Consul General Akil Oktem is here. We do have Consul General of Russia is here, whose name I hope I do not like butcher the name, Alexander Pisarev. And then we are also expecting Consul General of Pakistan, who's going to be here soon, I believe. We do have also Executive Director of Yunus Emre Institute in DC, who is with us tonight. We do have also our Provost, Stephen Berberich. Unfortunately, we cannot have our President. She just got a phone call, emergency phone call from the state of, from somewhere, Austin, I guess. She's in a meeting at the moment. She may or may not make the meeting. So we do have Associate Professor like Samuel Gladden with us as an Associate Dean. And we do have also like several colleagues and friends and then students. And I really thank you very much once again for taking your time, but most importantly, courage to be here tonight. Speaking of which, again, I mean, the most important thing is without being, in a panic mood, please keep social distance while we are here. And then we do have lots of hand sanitizers by the door. We just also apply hand sanitizers as much as possible. But you can still go out and then do those things. I'm very excited also for intellectual reasons. I mean, this is one of the subjects that I have been fascinated for many years. Why I am fascinated as a human and as a historian, I'll tell you in a minute. But before I do my short talk, I do give my short take on the subject. I would like to invite our Provost Stephen Berberich to give his welcome speech, and after that, I'm going to invite our honorable Consul General Akil Oktem. First, Steve Berberich is with you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome all of the dignitaries, the faculty, staff, and students of UHCL, all of you from the community and friends of UHCL for coming out. I think we're all excited about hearing tonight's lecture. I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Sisman, the College of Human Sciences and Humanities, and all of the faculty for helping putting this together. As Dr. Sisman has said, President Blake sends her regards. She apologizes for not being here, but as we're all aware right now, this is a very evolving situation with regards to coronavirus, so she's where she needs to be, engaged with leaders across the state as we explore about what's most important, which is the safety for all of us here as we deal with this very novel situation. But tonight, we're here to learn more about what is a remarkable discovery that I'm excited, and I plan to be here, got my seat over in it, because I think this is why we're all here, to exchange information. This university is it's very important to have global relationships, so I'm so excited to have 3 general counsel counsels here from Houston present at tonight's event. And so with that, I'd like to take an opportunity with Dr. Sisman to recognize those individuals. Thank you so much.
Honorable General Counsel Akil Oktem, please. We have small gifts here. Okay. And in return, I guess he is going to present something to Dr. Berberich. Okay. Would you want to yes, yeah. Okay. And then I would like to invite Executive Director Khaled Bulut, who is instrumental in putting this program together and then also creating the idea of giving a series of talk on Gobeklitepe in the United States. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Consul General of Russia, Alexander Pisarev, for being here. And yes, for the time being, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much again. I mean, I did fail to mention thanking for those again who have been like instrumental in materializing tonight. One more time, again, Khalid Bulut has been quite very passionate about this project for so many months, and since inception also I like the idea to support this project because again this is topic that I have been quite fascinated for so long time. I'm also thankful to Consul General Akil, who has been very supportive of the event from the beginning, and also Dr. Short, Dean Short, who's our dean. Unfortunately, he is not with us. He's out of country. He's out of the town at the moment. So I would like to thank them one more time that they have been instrumental in making this night possible. But perhaps more importantly, I'm very thankful to Dr. Clare, who is the coordinator and head of the excavation site about which we're talking tonight, who is ready, who is willing to share his first-hand information about this site. And then he, again, took his time and courage to be with us tonight. So we will introduce him in a moment, and I think he's going to provide us a feast. But before the feast, which is prepared by him tonight, I would like to give you some morsels, some vignettes about the site. And toward that end, I would like to say a few things. I'm not going to take much of your time. And after me, our very dear colleague, Sarah Costello, is going to also give her take on the issue. So, as a historian, but more so as a human being, again, this site is very, very important for me, very, very exciting for me. Because again, it created, after its finding, after its discovery a couple of decades ago, it led to some seismic changes in our understanding of human history. I'm someone who teaches human civilization, human globalization, human history. Therefore, this subject plays very, very important in my mindset, in my understanding of human civilization and human history. In crafting the text of the Declaration of Independence, the American founding fathers envisioned that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are the three essential, inalienable, undeniable rights given to all humans by their Creator, and which governments are created to protect. As a historian and as a human being again, I would like to add to this the quest for immortality, meaning life, liberty, and then pursuit of happiness should be added by the quest for immortality. From shamans to priests, from heroes to kings, from philosophers to scientists, humans, more specifically Homo sapiens sapiens, have been looking for answers for their anxiety of death and unknowns for hundreds of thousands of years. By the way, as you know, Homo sapiens means the one who knows, but Homo sapiens sapiens means the one who knows that who knows. So we are the ancestors. We are the children of the people who knew that he knew. Magic, religion, and now science were imagined, invented, and utilized by our primordial ancestors to ease up the tragedy of death and unknown surrounding us for so many thousands of years. Their anxieties and coping mechanisms have been carried through stories, art, architecture, and writings, again, over thousands of generations. We modern human beings, may forget about the quest for immortality a bit, relying perhaps too much on science, thinking that science is the remedy for all of our anxieties. But as the coronavirus outbreak painfully shows us recently, we humans are utterly helpless before death and many other unknowns surrounding us. In their long quest for immortality, Gobeklitepe, to me again, stands out as a landmark in the history of humankind. We are all coming from Africans. The only question whether we are distant Africans or recent Africans. We are quite mixed, apparently, and apparently we have been sleeping with each other for so many times. But despite how different we look, at the level of genome, we are 99% are the same. We have common proverbial ancestors. Human steps in Mesopotamia, human footsteps actually, in Mesopotamia, can be traced back as early as 1.5 million years. Homo sapiens have arrived in the same region, meaning Mesopotamia, or in ancient times it was also called as Fertile Crescents. Homo sapiens have arrived the same place almost 50,000 years ago. And now we understand that Göbeklitepe was built 10, maybe 11, maybe 12,000 years ago. In other words, our ancestors created a very complex society and produced some landmark architectural traces, memories back to us. The building, about which again we are going to learn a lot, or rather like series of buildings, predate all the known megastructures by 5,000-6,000 years. To put you in a perspective, it is much older than pyramids, it is much older than Stonehenges, and it is much older than the old religions that, not all the religions, but it's major religions that we know. It is, for example, 10,000 or 9,000 year prior to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam came into being. Therefore, this site, or discovery of this site, which happened just a couple decades ago, changed our major assumptions about human history. It's not assumption, it really changed our paradigm about human history, which assumes that our ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, were very primitive creatures. And then we evolved from them slowly but surely. So that site shows us that it was not necessarily the case. There were some complex human beings before the so-called recorded history. So, is this site the first temple, or is this a place which we can date the birth of civilization? These are some of the questions that we are entertaining today. But to me, these questions are somewhat irrelevant. To me, this site, or let me put it, with the knowledge that we have today, we cannot be so sure about it, about the function, about the meaning of this site. One thing for sure, at least for me as a historian, is that the civilization around Gobeklitepe was a giant leap, giant step in the history of Homo sapiens. And it was a form of answer that our ancestors gave to overcome the quest for immortality or the anxiety about death and unknowns. At this point, I would like to invite our art historian, Sir Costello, who gave his talk, because to me, this site should be interpreted by the members of different disciplines. Archaeology is relatively a young science. It is somewhat a Eurocentric too. Nevertheless, it reveals so many interesting knowledge for us in knowing ourselves as human species. Archaeologists are like miners. I always liken them to the miners, mine hunters. So they mine precious things for us. But when it comes to its interpretation, We need, again, historians and artists and art historians, psychologists, sociologists, you name it. We need an army of scholars or thinking human beings to interpret the meaning of it. So toward that end, as a historian, I gave my little, reflections on the site. Now I'm going to invite our Sarah Costello, who is going to, again, give her interpretation on the site, who is, by the way, one of the, not one of actually, she's the only a scholar as an expert on Gobeklitepe on our campus, and who has been teaching on the site for so many years. So I would like to welcome Sarah Costello to give her talk.
Good evening, Hoş geldiniz. Welcome. Thank you all for being here this evening. It's really an honor to have our Consuls General here, as well as Mr. Bulut from Washington, D.C., and a real privilege to be hosting Dr. Clare. I'd like to thank Dr. Sisman for arranging this seminar and asking me to speak. I'd also like to especially thank the students who are here, because it is your spring break. And so, welcome to the Army of Scholars. I like that phrase. Here we are. Dr. Clare will speak in detail about the archaeology and the significance of the site. What I'd like to do is set the stage for you and help you imagine what it may have been like to experience being at Gobeklitepe in 9000 BC. As you'll see this evening, the structures and images of Gobeklitepe are powerful, almost overwhelming. As we try to imagine the sensory experience of being at the site, the visual and spatial impact of these structures is the most striking. But beyond the visual, we should also consider, and I apologize, I think that Dr. Sisman asked me here to speak about the visual because I'm an art historian, but I went bigger. We're going to talk about all the senses. So we should also consider the haptic properties of the site, which is how things feel to our bodies and how our bodies feel when we're in spaces. The auditory, what sounds would we hear, as well as tastes and smells. Indeed, Gobeklitepe provides us with an array of sensory experiences. Towering megaliths carved with diverse visual symbols, enclosed dark spaces, and the broad open landscape, bright with sun by day and stars by night. The heavy, hard stones that were quarried and carried to a hilltop, where they stood still and rooted again in the earth. These structures and carvings were constructed in a world in which altered landscapes and semi-permanent structures were new expressions of human thought and will. You'll hear more about the megaliths tonight, these towering stone pillars, impressive also for the figures they bear. Let me go back here to the figural images on these. The upright T-shaped stones around the periphery of the structures feature predator and prey, mammals, reptiles, and birds, including aurochs, boars, foxes, ducks, scorpions, and snakes. Within the circle are even larger T-shaped pillars that have, in some cases, carved arms, hands, and clothing, including belts and loincloths. Here are the hands coming around the side, just to orient you. These are anthropomorphic representations, 5.5 meters high, far larger than life. The use of scale at the site is evident not only through these large carved stones, but also in the use of miniatures. Miniatures are present at Göbekli in several forms, including this small stone plaquette carved with images similar to the ones on the pillars, an anthropomorphic figure with upraised arms, between a snake and a bird. Sized to fit in your hand, it brings the symbols of the architecture to human scale, allowing you to touch, hold, and remember the images. The extreme scale of the large pillars and small stones would highlight the size of the other, amplifying their visual and haptic effect. The large stones, weighing up to 10 metric tons, were carried to the site through the labor of bodies. Perhaps as an incentive for that labor, there were feasts. Crowds of people would have had all senses stimulated through feasting and perhaps drinking, music and dance under a canopy of stars bright against a dark night sky. Such a break from routine, along with the concomitant social bonds established at the feast, would have made a strong impact on the memories of the events and their social relationships. The round structures were intentionally destroyed, filled in with rubble and debris, including the bone remains of feasting. Perhaps feasts were a part of both construction and destruction, or more likely, construction and destruction were part of a cycle of meaningful activities at the site. When we look at the monuments at Gobeklitepe, great and small, we see in the images a powerful natural world and the desire to exert human control within it. The monumental images structure the cosmology, placing human power in the center of it, in the large abstracted human forms of the central pillars. That power might be supernatural, magical, or divine, but its human form represents the human ability to channel power, likely through ritual and by ritual specialists. In the busy hum of our modern world, it's easy to forget the real darkness of a night sky, unpolluted by ambient light, the brightness of stars in that sky, the potential quiet of a barren hilltop, even the visual power of an image in a world with few of them, or of a built environment in a world with few of those. In this strange moment we're experiencing now, of pandemic, and amid appeals for social distancing, the social and economic changes that took place during the Neolithic period are surprisingly relevant. Our ancestors, who were living in small groups and moving around the landscape, foraging for food, gradually began to settle down and produce their own food, construct their own homes. Communities grew in size and had to deal with the issues that particularly plague us when we live in close proximity: how to get along with our neighbors, establish rules of conduct, manage resources, and control for disease. These challenges are significant then and now. Who we are is who we were. And facing today's challenges requires us to understand the past and the decisions that were made that shape the world we live in today. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Clare. Dr. Clare is a research lecturer at the Istanbul Department of the German Archaeological Institute and coordinator of research and fieldwork at Gobeklitepe. He completed his master's degree at the University of Cologne in 2005, specializing in the Central European Neolithic. His PhD, completed in 2013, was focused on climate-culture interactions in the Eastern Mediterranean during the early Holocene, and he has been working at the German Archaeological Institute since then. Please join me in giving a warm Houston welcome to Dr. Clare.
Short intervention. When I say that this site requires lots of interpreters, so we forgot to get the diplomatic perspective on the issue. So toward that end, I would like to invite briefly Honorable Akil to give his diplomatic perspective on the issue, and then we are going to go to the real piece. I mean, the real piece comes late, so you have to make a show. Please, would you mind?
Thank you, Professor Sisman. What can I say? Just a few words. Dear Provost, distinguished Director of the Yunus Emre Institute, Mr. Halit Bulut, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm honored to be here tonight with you to introduce Archaeologist Coordinator of Research and Fieldwork at Göbekli, Dr. Clare, to give a speech on 25 years of research at Göbekli, a summary of past and recent results. He gave a similar speech at the Oriental Institute of Chicago University on Monday and at Michigan State University on Tuesday. He is now in Houston today and he'll leave for Istanbul tomorrow night. We appreciate his untiring efforts. Congratulations. I would especially like to thank President Ira Blake of the University of Houston, Clare Lake, and Professor Cengiz for making this event possible. This project has been realized with the joint cooperation of the University of Houston, the Yunus Emre Institute in Washington, D.C., and our Consul General. Gobeklitepe, just a few words, is located about 15 kilometers east of the modern city of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. It was first discovered in 1963 when an archaeological survey team visited the site. The Göbeklitepe archaeological site was listed on the UNESCO World Heritage List for the first time on July 1st, 2008. Gobeklitepe year was proclaimed in Turkey in 2019 and was celebrated with various cultural events. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Clare, has been involved in this important project for many years. We are lucky to have him with us tonight. Thank you.
I'll be with you in just 1 second. Okay, would it be so? We're not here tonight. Okay. Right, that's better. I feel better now. I did actually have a new version of it, but somehow. Anyway, thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to speak here this evening. Distinguished guests, fantastic. I'm very grateful also that so many people have turned out this evening to hear about Gobeklitepe. It's going to be worth it, I think, and I think we have a lot to discuss. There are lots of things happening at the site, or have happened in the past 5 years, which are changing our whole interpretation of the site. And also, of course, considerations regarding function, regarding the reason people were there and what they were doing. So I'm going to bring up to speed really on developments. I would say since I've been working at the site, or since I was honoured to be able to take over from Klaus Schmidt when he died in 2014, I was asked to take care of the coordination of the project. And things have changed since then, and I think the biggest change we can see here on this third slide is the amount of attention that we have. Of course, Gobeklitepe was famous beforehand, but I think in the past year or two, things have really taken off, especially with last year being Gobeklitepe year, and also the year before that in 2018, us being inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Anyway, I'm going to talk about that and also about the new discoveries at the site, old interpretations, new interpretations, and I hope at the end we can have even more fruitful discussions regarding how we should best interpret the site. Anyway, I think that those of you who are archaeologists, and perhaps those that aren't archaeologists, are aware of the timescale involved here. I think it's important to mention the context, the chronological context of Gobeklitepe. And here we can see the chronology more or less of the Neolithic and what the Neolithic actually means. The Neolithic, of course, being the period when people became sedentary, hunter-gatherers became sedentary, and they started farming. But this was a long, drawn-out process, often referred to as the longue durée. And you can see here that three of the most important packages, as it were, that belong to the Neolithic. That's sedentism, which actually starts back in the Epipaleolithic, so previous to Gobeklitepe, 9,600 older than that BC. And actually, then we had domesticated plants and animals coming in around the mid-9th millennium BC, and invention of pottery coming in around the early 8th millennium, 8th millennium BC. 7th millennium BC, sorry. So, and you can see here, we've heard it mentioned the Fertile Crescent at the top here. And Gobeklitepe, as we know from recent radiocarbon ages that we have, dates to around 9,500 to 8,000 calibrated BC. So the first part of this Neolithic transition, the reason it's called here PPNA and PPNB, it means pre-pottery Neolithic, because of course pottery doesn't come in until much later. So it's a pre-pottery Neolithic with sedentary hunter-gatherer population. So these people that built this site were in fact still hunters and gatherers. They had not become farmers as yet. We have no indications from the archaeology that the people there were farming in any way. They were collecting and they were processing wild wheats, but they were still hunting animals. And then at the top left here you can see more or less a paradigm that's emerged since the mid-1990s around Gobeklitepe, and that it being the place where religion was born, or the place of the first temples. I have a problem with this interpretation in a way, especially regarding in the light of new discoveries at the site, which I'll go onto in a minute. And I think it's more important that we use more neutral terms to describe Gobeklitepe, not as the birthplace of religion, but obviously a very important social centre, for example, and not the first temples, but I refer to them as special buildings, different from the domestic, so they're special in a way. But they had more than one function, they weren't just ritual buildings, and we'll go into that as well in a few moments. The location of Gobeklitepe we can see here. On the left-hand side we have a map of southeastern Turkey. You can see here the border, the Turkish-Syrian border here. This is the Haran Plain, which is framed on three sides by hills or mountains, and the Gobeklitepe site lies, as we heard, to the east of Şanlıurfa, the modern city of Şanlıurfa, in the Germuş Mountains, at an elevation of 770 meters above sea level, so about 300 or 400 meters above the plain below. So here you can see the view to the south from the site, here the Haran Plain, and over here would be then Şanlıurfa, slowly growing in size. It's grown quite dramatically in the past years. If we look to the north from the site, we have, on good days with good visibility, views of the eastern Taurus. Sometimes, in the springtime, it's a good time to go. You can see still the snow on the mountain peaks. And actually from Gobeklitepe, you can also see the site of Nemrut. And then to the east, if we look east, we can see here the Karacadağ, which is a mountainous volcanic massif where, according to results from a much earlier study in the 1990s, einkorn wheat was domesticated roughly contemporaneous with Gobeklitepe. Bottom here you can see the site previous to the construction of the modern shelters. It hasn't changed. We have the main excavation area here, which was started in the mid-1990s, and then an extension across the southwest mound, and then in the northwestern part of the site, more recent areas of excavation, more recent trenches. Important to say, and you can't actually see it well in this photograph, but we have, the site isn't a mound or a perfect symmetrical mound, but it's actually a series of sort of hillocks or mounds and dips or depressions, hollows, whatever you want to call them. So here we have another hollow here as well, the northwestern hollow, and we have a mound here and a mound here. So it's a series of mounds and dips. And that's quite important, as we'll see. Research history, of course, we can't look at a site without considering who has worked there, who has been there, who's responsible for this fantastic discovery. The site itself was first discovered in the mid-1960s, in 1963 to be precise, in the frame of survey work undertaken in a joint collaboration by the University of Istanbul and the Oriental Institute in Chicago in the US. In charge of that project was then Braidwood here on the left-hand side and Halil Çambel from the University of Istanbul. After its discovery in 1963, the site was more or less forgotten. It was obviously recorded. It was recorded as a prehistoric site. There was lots of lithics, so flint on the surface. There were also large pieces of worked limestone, which at the time were interpreted as something much younger. How could this be anything prehistoric? And you know, people were thinking, well, the specialists thought perhaps we're listing a prehistoric site with modern post-Roman building and burials. And for that reason, the site was not excavated, and attention turned to another Neolithic site, an important site, not far from Diyarbakir at Chayun. Anyway, in the mid-1990s, Klaus Schmidt here returned, or came to the site in his quest. He was looking for a new Neolithic site to excavate. He'd just worked together with his Doktorvater, so his PhD teacher, Harald Hauptmann, at Nevalechoi, another T-pillar site which was excavated in the 90s, early 90s and late 80s. As I say, Klaus Schmidt returned and recognized that these large worked fragments of limestone were actually fragments of T-pillars. And for this reason, he saw the potential of this site, and excavations commenced there in 1995, at which time Hauptmann was the director of the Istanbul department of the German Archaeological Institute. So he took over, together with the Shannon Museum, the directorship of the site, and Klaus Schmidt, much like I am now doing today, was in charge of the field work and research. In 2009, excavations extended. In 2006, upon the retirement of Harald Hauptmann, Klaus Schmidt became the excavation director. In 2009, as I pointed out, excavations went over here to the northwestern part of the site, and in 2011 the site was actually inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List. This is a bit I can talk a bit more about. This is the period that I've been working at the site. So you can see here changes since in those years. Between 2013 and 18, of course, we had the application process and inscription eventually of Gobeklitepe on the World Heritage List. In 2017, we had an exhibition centre constructed. In 1718, the site was actually closed, and permanent shelters constructed over the site. Here, one of them over the main excavation area. In 2009, this was then taken as a good reason to have the Göbeklitepe year. Each year in Turkey, a different site is nominated by the Ministry of Culture, and that year is celebrated in honour of that site. And the year before, I think it was Troy, and 2019 was then Göbeklitepe year. And in March of the same year, we had the official reopening by the Turkish president, and a subsequent visitor influx, an impression of which you can see up here on the right-hand side. Of course, a lot of publicity. This is a copy, a one-to-one copy of some of the pillars from the site, presented at the new Istanbul airport. World Heritage inscription, also, of course, a very important step. This happened, as I say, in 2018. The site itself covers 587 hectares in the Germosh Mountains. It has a first-degree site, which is small. It's 126 hectares. It includes the mound and the surrounding plateau, which we'll see in a second, and a buffer zone around it of 461 hectares to protect the integrity of this site. And it's also, of course, we hope, full of archaeology. We'll be starting surveys in this region, in this area quite soon, in this buffer zone, hoping to upgrade the third degree to a first degree buffer zone. Why was it inscribed? Well, 3 criteria. Criterion 1, according to UNESCO, it's a masterpiece of creative human genius. Criterion 2, it shows an important interchange of human values. And 4, it's an outstanding example of a type of building, illustrating significant stages in human history. Up here, we have, again, a lot of books and publications which have contributed to the interpretation of the site as being the birthplace of religion and the world's first temples. And as I say, prior to the inscription, I mean, it was discussed whether we use this interpretation in the inscription procedure with UNESCO, but we decided not to, and for this reason, it hasn't gone down with UNESCO as the site of the world's first temples, but really things are sticking to these criteria. So why didn't we want this in the nomination dossier? We'll come to that in a second. I just want to show you here, first of all, the visitor centre. We can see here the actual archaeological site. We have a pathway here for the shuttle buses. So the visitor comes along here, arrives in a car or a bus, goes into the new visitor centre, which you can see here. We have a restaurant, a souvenir shop. We have the information exhibition centre, and then, let's say, this then takes a visitor to the site. We were fortunate enough to be able to work together with Dorsch Group, who have built this centre. So we have everything up to date, the newest information, which we can change on a regular basis because this is all very modern technology with swipe screens, etc. So we can sort of go in there and sort of change things as we need to. And of course, for the younger generation, we have then this wonderful sort of 180-degree sort of experience where you can go in and immerse yourself in light and drums and various things to alter your, just get the feeling of perhaps the ambience which we heard about earlier. In I think more of a 2010 sort of way. We actually had to do a survey in this area prior to the building of these structures here, the visitor centre. And it's very interesting and very important that the site in front of its doorstep actually has an area of basalt. This is one of the very few archaeological sites from this time in this region where they have otherwise it's limestone, everything's limestone, but right in front of the site, just a kilometre away, we have an island, a very small area of basalt, which, as we now know from our surveys, was being used at the time to quarry the all-important grinding stones for the wild wheat. So this is a very important, why it's one of the reasons why people settled there, not just the views of the surroundings and perhaps other reasons, but also, of course, the sources of raw materials were also given. These are the new shelters, and of course this brought along challenges with it, but also very good points, because in the course of the preparation for the construction of these shelters, we had to do very deep soundings through the entire mound down to the underlying limestone plateau, because of course when you drill the foundations of these structures, you can't drill through archaeology. So we actually did multiple deep soundings down to the bedrock so that these foundations could be drilled, and it's in these soundings that we found the most important evidence for our new interpretations of the Gobeklitepe site. The shelter here is accessible for the public, so they come here and walk around the shelter and see the site from all perspectives. They can walk up to the wish tree and around across the southwest mountain and out. At some point, this other shop site here, the northwest area of that shelter, will be made accessible to the public, but at the moment it's our laboratory. And we have our peace and quiet there. Because of course working here comes with other challenges. For example, we have the visitors, talking with visitors, just a few photos of the building site. That was a great challenge as well. We had to jump really because we're working together with the builders. Sometimes bits of trench and bogs were in the way, and we were asked to move them quite quickly because of course there was time pressure behind the whole project. But it all went remarkably well and nothing was damaged. So we're very thankful for that. Visitors, as I said, we have a massive increase in the visitors, and a very important economic factor for the southeastern Turkish region. And last year, 2019, we made it on position 8 of the top 10 visited archaeological sites in Turkey. We had over 400,000 visitors last year, which actually means a constant flow around the site. And of course, at the weekends, also on the public holidays in the Bayram, we do have even more people that we have overflowing car parks, etc. So the real thirst for knowledge of visitors is really unabated, and that's a good sign. I think it's a very good thing, not just for the economy of the region, but also to know that we are, people are interested. They want to know what's going on there, and for that reason, we make sure that the information available is there through talks like this, but also through our work with the visitor centre, etc. So here's the site from the west. You can see here the visitor centre, you can see here the area of resort in the midground here, and then up here the archaeological site. Back again to some basics. So far a total of 8, I'm not going to say temples, but 8 special buildings have been discovered at Gobeklitepe, labelled alphabetically from A to H in the order of their discovery. One exception being E, which was excavated in the mid-1990s at the very beginning of work by Clare, but at the time it was the foundations on the plateau. He wasn't aware that it was one of these special buildings. That only really occurred to him after the excavation of C and D. Here a plan, a stone plan of the site. So here down the bottom you can see A, here is B, C and D, over here is G, and the others are, I would say, strewn across the site. You have E down here, like I mentioned, F here on the southwest mound, and over here in the northwestern part of the site, we have building H. There are many more of these buildings, presumably underneath the surface of the mound, that haven't been excavated yet. This is a plan, or it shows the anomalies found in geophysics, georadar, ground-penetrating radar. This was undertaken in 2013. And you can see here a series of anomalies here, and it's based on these data that Klaus Schmidt often wrote that at least 20 further monumental special buildings remain to be excavated. Could be, I mean, I can't find 20 here, but what we do know is that here's building H again. We know that from excavations here, the building H does not actually correspond or tally with any of the anomalies we see here in the ground penetrating radar. This could be because we're not deep enough, and the excavations here are very superficial. We haven't gone down very deep yet. That could be one reason. But we have to be very careful when interpreting this. I think what we can see here could be architecture, but it could be just the underlying bedrock, limestone, perhaps worked, quarried. So we have to be very careful. But saying that, we know that building C down here has a diameter of 30 meters, and if this is a building, and it's very suspicious, it would have a diameter of 60 meters. That would be a very, very big building indeed. So, as I say, I have my doubts. I don't like saying there are 20 beneath the soil still to be discovered. I say there are further ones there, but I think we have to go back to the site perhaps with better technology, and of course combined with small-scale excavations. So what are the characteristics of these special buildings? We heard briefly about the cupolas, but yeah, generally speaking, this is building D, perhaps one of the best preserved buildings at the site, monumental special buildings at the site. Generally they have a round to oval ground plan. At the centre, or near centre, we have these 2 freestanding pillars which can reach a height of 5.5 metres. In the case of C and D, building C and D, they're actually slotted into these pedestals which are carved from the limestone plateau beneath. This is the limestone plateau which has been carefully, painstakingly smoothed at the time to make the floor of the building. So lots of work gone into this. And then a series of further T-pillars, slightly smaller T-pillars in the walls of the building. Now these pillars were actually inserted into the wall. They weren't actually freestanding. They were inserted into the wall. They have courses of stone below them, for example. And as to the number, we don't actually know the exact number because none of these buildings has been excavated in its entirety. So in the future years, we really have to go back and we have to take one of these buildings and excavate it entirely. But usually it is around 12, 13, but it varies. And as you'll see, these buildings do have a long history, so for that reason, it could have been at different times, different numbers. So it's always difficult to say, how many pillars a building actually had. As we also heard, some of these buildings are decorated, some of these pillars are decorated. Actually, the majority are undecorated, but there are some very exceptional ones that are decorated. We saw this one earlier on. This is pillar 18 from building D, which, as we know, are anthropomorphic. We have, as we heard, the belt buckle here. We have the loincloth coming down here, a fox fur. We have the hands on the stomach, and then here at the side, we saw in the earlier photograph, we had the arms coming down, bent to the elbow, and here inserted into this pillar. You can see here that it's all carved from the underlying limestone plateau. Up here, what you can't see is a necklace, for example. So these are individuals, these are characters obviously known to the people that built them, that constructed them. They knew who they were depicting. These are people that they knew from their narratives, and we'll come to narratives again in a moment. And the other T-pillars in the walls, they're inserted, and the walls are not dry stone walls, often written, but they're held together by mud mortar. As we also heard, the buildings were filled up. This accounts for very good preservation of these buildings, so they became inundated, they were buried, and this proved then beneficial for their preservation over the millennia. And then, of course, the quarrying. We have around, this is the site here in the background. There's a few hundred meters from the site here on the plateau. You can see here, this is a pillar which is still in situ in the quarry. Here, further pillars or pieces were removed. This one was actually carved and left as it was in the quarry. So this is a snapshot from 10,000 years ago when this T-pillar was abandoned. Why it was abandoned, we don't know. Perhaps it had a weakness, perhaps it broke. But if it did break during the quarrying, then I'm sure they weren't very happy about it, and the air was quite blue. But it's a wonderful piece, and if they'd actually taken this and actually put it upright, it would have been probably one of the tallest, or the tallest pillar at the site known so far, near 7 meters in height. Then we have other evidence for the quarrying at the site. Here we have another negative, where a piece was obviously worked and pulled out. We have these little holes or gaps here, probably the stakes which are sort of driven in to actually split the limestone. The limestone is very good. It can be, it's easy to work. It's quite soft compared to other stone, and it's also, it comes in sort of benches and you can split it. And over here on the top left, we have an example of how how it's envisaged these pillars were then transported on wooden rollers. This is a photograph from the UHCL Museum, the largest and one of the most recent and newest museums in Turkey, and highly recommended, a fantastic museum. So, perhaps before I start criticising earlier interpretations of the site, perhaps we should look why the site was interpreted as it has been, or as it was by Klaus Schmidt. Now, according to Klaus Schmidt, the point that this was the site of the world's first temples for the following reasons. I've put down here that it's often referred also to the 0 point in time, and even in some publications, or in some I've seen on a few occasions, as ground zero, which doesn't really strike a chord with me either. But these are the reasons why it was believed that the site was a purely ritual site, a sanctuary. Firstly, the absence of domestic buildings. It was always said the site, there were no domestic buildings, therefore these buildings were all monumental. People were coming here, gathering here, and celebrating and going again. The absence of water sources. Obviously, on the top of the plateau, you have no rivers. The intentional backfilling of the special buildings, obviously a celebration and motivating a workforce, for example, through feasting, the remains of which were found in the fill of the buildings, and of course the fermentation of beer. All of these being reasons why it was considered the site was a ritual site and nothing else. And that's then, you see that in the publications I showed you earlier. Here are a few examples from a few quotes from publications here. For those of you that can't read German, Klaus Schmidt writes here that its attribution or its interpretation as a cult or a sacred site is certain. We know that how settlements looked at this time, and this doesn't look like a settlement. He knew, obviously, that we had water at the site, but only through the presence of cisterns. Cisterns were at the site, and he said the nearest sources of water, springs, were 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers away from the site. But these cisterns were known to him. But what wasn't known to him, of course, is the age. It's very difficult to date cisterns like this, especially if they're used for over a long period of time, in fact, used until recently by local shepherds. Then he said, yes, the buildings were intentionally buried, and they used limestone rubble from the quarries nearby, flint artifacts and a large number of animal bones, testifying to the remains of meals and large-scale feasting, which may have a special category in order to sort of get the people to come to the collective work events. So that's the background. That was a previous interpretation, until just recently. Now let's go and look at the new evidence that we have. This is the northwestern part of the site, the new triangular roof. You can see here vertical photographs of the trenches that have been excavated so far. Let's go one further. You can see the stone plan here. Then it's building H. So here's one of the central pillars discovered. The other one lies still hidden. As I say, excavations here are still at a very early stage. I want to draw your attention to these boxes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and DR2. These are the where the foundations of building of the new shelter were drilled. Therefore, we had to remove all of the archaeology to do that. And we're going to now look at the domestic buildings, and we're going to look at number 5 and DR2. DR2 stands for drainage 2. That's a very long channel, a metre wide trench. We had to excavate the new shelter to sort of bury the rainwater drainage channel or pipe that came off of it. So here is trench 5, and this is quite convincing. We have several different life-based structures in here, have a agglomerative building. This is not monumental in no way. And most importantly, we have these wonderful activity zones here. We have halves, several halves. We have concentrations of bone tools, which we had bone tools previously, but not in such high concentrations. And we have here the entire champ operatoire of bead production. Beads made of stone, beads made of small animal, bird bones, the whole champ operatoire is also visible. So people were sitting here, they were chipping their stone mediphics, they were using bone tools, they were producing beads. And if we go to a few details, here we can see this section here of this building. You can see multiple floors coming in here. We still don't know whether this occupation was permanent or whether it was seasonal, but at least they did come back and they put in new floors, for example. Here, subsequent buildings with these so-called terrazzo floors, sort of very hard floors, which here subsequent buildings. And then if we go to, for example, to these are all contemporaneous sites, more or less PKNA sites. We go here to Jebel Ahmar in northern Syria. We have a very, very similar picture of domestic here in a reconstruction. So these are excavations by the French, by Daniel Stordeur, published a few years back. And as the age, the PKNA age, we know that architecture at the time was round. So in the late 10th millennium, architecture was round, buildings were generally round. And we have these wonderful arrowheads, which also we know the age of. These are typical PKNA arrowheads, so late 10th millennium BC, so-called Jordan Valley and Tel Caramel points from local 166 in this area, and also El Kian points. So these are additional information about the age of these buildings. So we have the architecture around architecture, we have the arrowheads, and above these sediments in which these buildings were found, we have radiocarbon dates, which also are of PKNA age. So a very early settlement. From the very beginning, people were living at Göbekli Tepe. Then we go to this wonderful trench down here that we have put in for the rainwater pipe. We have a long 40-metre trench, 1 metre wide, with a tank area at the bottom. And in this trench, we found the remains of 8 architectural structures, also including halves and middens, so rubbish pits. And of course, this is still under interpretation, but of course when you've got a 1 metre wide trench, it's very difficult to do anything, but the proximity to the other trench that I just showed you is, they're close, and this is PKNA. Also near bedrock, this is PKNA, late 10th millennium architecture. People were living here at this time. Let's go on a bit chronologically. Sometimes people generally sort of concentrate on these monumental special buildings in the middle. What they can forget is the buildings around the outside, these rectangular buildings. Now these rectangular buildings, because they're rectangular, we know that they're later in date. Now around the mid-9th millennium BC, say 8,700, transitioning from PKNA to PKNB, they discovered the corner. Roundhouses continued to be used, but they discovered the corner, probably for storage purposes perhaps. Of course, these are then all younger, PKNB in date, so from around 8,700 BC onwards. But the nice thing is, we have this building here, it's called the Taschen Temple, in German, the bag temple. This is where the workmen actually put their bags for their lunch breaks when Klaus Schmidt was at the site. So it's called the Taschen Temple, but he never actually fully excavated it. And just a few years back, we actually finished the excavation of the unexcavated floor, and lo and behold, beneath the rectangular building, we have a lovely round plaster floor. And if you look closely, the walls are still rounded. They actually changed a building from round to rectangular. And this is a transition that we don't have at any other site, as far as I know, where a round building is actively changed to a rectangular one. So a very interesting thing for us. And of course, there are the lithics from here. This is quite interesting. Our poor PhD student, Jonas, had to record all the lithics from one half of this fill, and he had such a bad job. He had over 23,000 chipped stones to get through, which he did. I mean, I was very impressed. And he could show that, and this is important as well for our domestic interpretation, that this distribution, flakes, blades, cores, blah, blah, arrowheads, and micro, all of this is very, very typical of domestic sites. So another indication. And then we have another type building. This, if you see here, this is the room here, it's also called Space 8 or Room 8. And this type of building occurs all around here, these blue boxes, blue buildings. Characteristic is at one end like a raised platform into which one or two T-pillars, the T-pillar is stuck in. And then over here we have a niche in one corner. We have roof claps with grinding stones in it and various spines. Here we have a couple of stone bowls, of course no pottery, as I said. And if we look at schematic version of that, what we see here, and this is most important actually for us, indications in the architecture for an upper story, at least a floor and probably an upper story. And then frequently we have these fragments of so-called portal stones, which we now think were the entranceways into this lower floor. And the T-pillar itself combines not only its symbolic value, but also acts to carry the floor of the building. So it's fulfilling more than one function. And to sort of seal it, as it were, then we were very, very lucky. We had another drainage channel here here's the first new shelter, GT1 we call it. We had another drainage channel for the rainwater pipe. We expect another 1 meter wide trench down about 30 odd meters. And we hit a rectangular building with a floor. And in that floor we had sort of a kidney-shaped pit. And we thought straight away, could it be? We hoped, and it was. It's our first subfloor burial at Gobeklitepe, beneath a house. And of course, this is very characteristic of the period that people were burying their dead beneath the floors or just outside the doors of their houses. They didn't have separate cemeteries, but they were burying the dead with the living. So when Granny popped her clogs, they just made a hole in the floor and popped her in. It's quite nice actually. Anyway, in this burial, we had at least 3 individuals. We had 2 females and 1 male or female, it's not quite sure. We have 3 skulls, one's hidden beneath this skull here. One female was 11 to 14 years old, another older than 35, and the male, female, we're not quite sure, 20 to 30 years. The burial had been disturbed in the past, in prehistory obviously, because the bones had been pushed to the sides of the pit, but still, to a certain extent, in articulation. Grave goods were missing apart from 1 or 2 large lithic blades, flint blades. So we're very happy about that. So, we've got the settlement. So if we have the settlement, we need the water. Now the water, no rivers obviously on top of the plateau, but what we do see here, this was compiled by Klaus Schmidt a few years before he died. This is a map showing the drainage. This is the main excavation area with A, B, C, and D in. And here you see the drainage of the water as it flows down from the plateau. And all these little pink, purple, I think pink dots here, these are all either systems or channels carved into the plateau. They were actually, channeling the water into systems, but it wasn't sure how old these remains were, these pits and channels. What actually happened very early on in the excavations in the 90s, mid to late 90s, one of these systems was excavated by the archaeobiologist Rainer Neff from Berlin, from the DAI, from the German Archaeological Institute. He was looking for botanical remains, and what he pulled out were human bones. Now these human bones somehow ended up, or were taken then to Berlin, where just recently they were analysed, and it was discovered that these long bones predominantly long bones, were showing scratch marks, very characteristic of a secondary burial from the PPM period. So this is something that for us really dated then these pits, these systems. We could safely say, yeah, we think, 80% certainty that the people were already collecting rainwater at this time. And of course, at this time, the early Holocene, 9,000 BC, there was more rainfall in the region. It's not as dry as it is today, but there may have been more rainfall in the winter, but also possibly even summer rainfall. This is something we're looking into now with our experts. For paleoclimate, we're doing coring nearby, but that's another story. That's results to come in the future. But here you can see the channels and the systems. And now I want to bring your attention to our deep salmon number 2 and number 3. If we go to 2, we find eventually these channels also under the mound itself. So they're actually channeling water on site. And the nice thing about this is they have this lovely carved channel which is actually covered by limestone slabs. So they're actually covering the channels. It looks a lot younger than it is. This is PPM, this is like 9,000 BC. And most interesting in this respect is then the other trench I want to show you. The deep salmon is over here. So here's the drainage. This channel is here. And over here, just these 10-metre trenches. So about 15 metres over in this direction, we found this in the deep salmon. Now this is, we think, possibly a system. We haven't got final confirmation yet. We need to do some analyses probably on the sides of the pit. But what we have here, it's not totally excavated, only one corner is excavated. But we have this channel coming in here, a very narrow channel. And what you see here, what looks like a wall, this is actually ballast. And this ballast is holding down these big limestone slabs. And these limestone slabs, if you look more closely, they're actually giving a corbelled roof. So what we have here is the earliest, as far as I know, evidence for corbelled roofing. A corbelled roof is one of these roofs where you have the slabs coming in, and it eventually forms a dome. Now we don't know whether this dome was formed by this corbelling, but at least we have the first 4-5 courses. It perhaps was a flat roof on the top, but in any case it was roofed, probably, and may have been used as a system. And this would have contained, would have held a lot of water. Okay, let's come to the special buildings. This is a reconstruction by our building archaeologist Maurice Consul, how he envisages the inside of these buildings. You can see roofed over. We think they were roofed over. We don't know whether they're roofed over for the whole of their sort of lives, use lives. But what speaks in favour of the roofing is the fact that these central freestanding pillars, or near central freestanding pillars, would never have stood up on their own. The foundations in these pedestals, these carved pedestals here, were very shallow, 10, 15 centimetres, 6 inches, no deeper. And even today, we have to support them with wires, wire ropes, and wood. And another reason, the surrounding pillars in the walls, if you look more closely, they are all plus minus 10, 15 centimetres, the same elevation, the same height. So that would speak in favour of a cover, of a roof. But there's more to the buildings than that now that we know. One question has always been, were they semi-subterranean? Now, the Germans have a great word to say sort of ja and nein, so sort of yes and no. What we have here, and this is how we envisage, this is another reconstruction by Moritz, we have here, we think when the people arrived, they found sort of the limestone stepped formation, stepped limestone formation. This is quite characteristic of the natural limestone. If you look at the surrounding hills around Gobeklitepe, they all have this stepped sort of limestone, and this could have actually been even further stepped, as it were, by quarrying. I mean, why quarry a T-pillar 200 metres on the limestone plateau? And why not quarry it where you're going to build a building? You don't have to drag it so far. I mean, I'd do it that way. So that's what we're considering now. So here's building D. Here's and of course, the bench formed by this quarrying or by the natural limestone formation was perhaps used to support the wall. But on the other side, it was perhaps open. But eventually it filled up, and we know that the deposits around it were probably younger than the buildings themselves. So they weren't actually excavated into earlier deposits. There was no nucleus tell, as Klaus called or actually proposed. You can see here a few of the PKA domestic buildings as well around. Not only that, these things were long-lived. We know now from the building archaeology, this is building B. The different colours here, we have this purple, we have the pretty colourblind purple, the blue, and this yellow colour. Now the outer one, this darker one, that is the first phase of this building. After which they constructed another one inside it, and inside of that another. So they're actually building inside an older building. This is known from the Balichoi, for example, we have rectangular tiled building, one inside the other. But it seems been practiced at Gobeklitepe as well, in all of the buildings, in fact, that so far been discovered. Monumental special buildings, nearly all. Why was this done? Well, we think possibly they were actually trying to sort of support or structural inadequacies of previous buildings may have led them to sort of say, okay, we need to strengthen this a bit, we put another building inside, fill it up with rubble, and everything's a bit safer. And I think that's what they were doing. This is then supported by radiocarbon ages. Now this is building D, and here we have new radiocarbon ages from building D. They haven't been published yet, all of them. 15 ages in total, 3 actually fell out because there were tooth and animal bone doesn't date very well at Göbekli because there's no collagen preserved. And 1 was from the fill, and we want to date the fill. We actually took these radiocarbon ages from the mortar, the clay mortar, or the mud mortar in the walls, actually bits of small charcoal that had been embedded in the clay, in the mud mortar were dated. And they came back very interestingly with a very wide span, chronologically speaking, of dates. A cluster here, which is PKA date, late 10th millennium BC, and a younger cluster dating to the mid-9th millennium BC. Now, that's a long period of time, but if we combine those dates with the building archaeological results, here again, the older phase, then this blue is then the next phase, and yellow and orange is the youngest. These older dates were found in this blue wall, in fact, and the younger dates in the yellow wall. So what we... Really? I better hurry up. Okay, so what we have here then, we have proof that these buildings were long-lived. Another important thing is the fill of these buildings. We were told it was a ritual filling. Now, if we look at the stratigraphy of this in a bit more detail, we see this is probably not the case. We now know that the buildings here, the final phases, dated to the PKB and were contemporaneous with these rectangular structures. And what happened is these rectangular structures actually slipped into the buildings. We don't think it was intentional backfilling of the building. It was always, where was this stuff coming from? Was it coming from the plateau? No, we think these are the settlement accumulations which actually slipped into the buildings at the end of their use lives. Okay, and of course that has lots of problems because, and it also explains, if you look at the material in the lithics, the arrowheads, they are PKA and PKB arrowheads. So, whereas previously Klaus Schmidt actually dated the whole of the fill to the PKA, to so-called level 3, we now know it's mixed. So we had to start from the very beginning, more or less, with various things. But a very important piece of information. And this is how we perhaps can sort of how we might represent this in reconstructions. Here by Moritz again, we have the covered or the roofed over buildings B, C, and D. Here's the rectangular structures around, a few round ones in between, and then at some point it goes boom. And of course we're in a dip in one of these depression hollows, as I said, and the slopes slip in. This is what I'm saying. This is why they were trying to reinforce the buildings, putting one inside another to reinforce. It had lots of pressure coming from the slopes. And then, of course, they tried to recuperate. They put in terrace walls. They tried to make things a bit more stable. And we have final phases of C. The chronology we're still working on, but this is how we envisage more or less the situation now at Göbekli. And of course, that brings us with problems then with the feasting, because of course previously the finds from the fill were interpreted as feasting events, but now we know this accumulation of bones was actually from the slip of accumulations of PKA and PKB settlement deposits. And as for the beer, well, we have these samples which test fermentation, but we haven't been able to repeat them yet. on other drops. So we have to be careful there as well. I think we have to say tentative. We have to be very careful. So feasting, we don't really have any good archaeological evidence for feasting. I'd like to see like a feasting pit or whatever, but we don't have that anymore. So these are different interpretations. 2011, the ritual intentionally backfilled site, and then 2017, this construction was sort of begun with the settlement around square buildings and the monumental buildings here, the monumental buildings. So I want to take 5 minutes at the end just to give my little interpretation. I'm sorry if I'm speaking too fast. So what were these special buildings? I think we have to go back to the context, really, to answer that. We're in a Neolithic transition. But I first want to find out, what, it's always said population pressure was a problem at this time. People became sedentary, had more children. I want to look into that, so I took the surrounding PKNA sites in the late 10th millennium. We know how large they were. I used data, ethnographic data used by Ian Kite for the southern Levant when he was looking at the megasites. And it's a matter of multiplying these inhabitants per hectare onto the size of these PKNA sites. I'm aware that's dangerous because we don't know whether the whole sites were occupied at once, whether people moving around, came and went back, but still, we do have this, we've arrived at a number of between 128 and 419. I like this number roughly because, of course, Dunbar's number, 150, this is a size, it's said that beyond 150, the human brain is not capable of keeping track of reciprocal relationships between different groups. So I think the problem wasn't actually the scale, the number of people, the population pressure on resources, but I think the population pressure on the human cognitive system and how to keep track of those people. And funny enough, there's no evidence for warfare or conflict at this time. So how are they doing it? For example, in the face of disintegrating social cohesion, because of course you don't know all your neighbours, things are going to disintegrate. You're going to have people collecting more surplus. You're going to have the incipient social hierarchization, the first time the haves and the have-nots. You're going to have competition over resources, territoriality. And all of these things need a mitigation mechanism. And I think these buildings that we have at Gobeklitepe are one mitigation mechanism. I mean, look at the shape. If these are anthropomorphic, we have the two important individuals in the middle, and we have this, they're sitting, they're having a meeting, they're talking, they're in a circle. And, who were they? Were they ancestors? We have, a few years back, we published this article with the so-called grooved skulls, these skulls with deep incisions. They occur on the top of the skull, even on the bottom of the jaw. It was posited that they were perhaps even hung up and displayed. Were these the ancestors? It was quite, it's known that skulls were exhumed from some burials, perhaps decorated and displayed. Same happened to the statues, by the way. Before statues were thrown away, they were decapitated as well, and mostly just by the heads or the bodies. This is from the domestic area that I showed you at the very beginning. We found both pieces, which is quite fortunate. And what do you need to keep a group together? You need narratives. And the narratives, of course, are on the pillars as well. I mean, these aren't just pictures of your everyday, what's running around the local environment. This is telling a story. I mean, this is a pillar from Building 8, but this one, for example, pillar 43, the famous one from Building D, we have these so-called handbags, which, considering now the evidence of cordwood roofing, could be actual buildings themselves, vultures, the guy down here missing his head, but with the phallus. All of this is the I or the H symbol. These are all narratives we can't decipher yet. But I think what we're seeing here is perhaps a last blossoming of a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer culture in the face of encroaching Neolithic lifeways. These are aged. This is so special about Gobeklitepe. What we see at the site are the narratives which are much older than the site itself. I think we're seeing here late Pleistocene hunter-gatherer narratives for the first time, probably last time, engraved on the stone, or with these, high low reliefs. It was a very important factor of keeping that group together, the narratives. And most importantly, and people forget this very much, Gobeklitepe is one of numerous T-pillar sites in the region. We have Gobeklitepe here, but there are various others. Excavations at Nivali Choi, I mentioned at the very beginning, with Halfmine and Clark Schmidt, dates to the PPNB, with rectangular structures. Meanwhile, we have two excavations underway at Sisman and Tepe here in the Tepe Mountains, which have revealed T-pillars and, in the case of Sisman, PPNB structures, rectangular structures, but there are many others known from surface surveying, about a dozen or so. So it's a whole system, and these T-pillars are quite characteristic for the Shannon-Gulfa region. And last but not least, the legacy of Gobeklitepe. And I love this slide because this is a pillar 66 from building H. You see this aurochs, its tongue hanging out, its legs buckled, it's been hunted. We have here the bones of an aurochs from the site with a projectile still embedded. And this is a tradition which continued right through into the late Neolithic. Here a wall painting from Chateauhuyuk, the same tongue hanging out, the baiting of this animal. So a tradition that went, you could even argue the rectangular houses, the entrance through the roofs. And I think the movement of the ritual sphere from the round monumental buildings, perhaps into the rectangular buildings themselves, are all things that we need to discuss in this new context. So I think I'm at the end. I apologise for overrunning, but of course I'll be here for questions. So thank you.
Is this presentation available on the Archaeology Institute website?
No, it will be here, I think, because it's been recorded.
Well, I heard about this place in 2005, and in 2009, we went there with a group of archaeologists to see the place. At that time, the other areas were not excavated, so we just had those that were supposed to be the temples.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting a picture that there was something living
Yeah,
here.
definitely.
Maybe a living area. But there's so many questions about this place, actually, I think when we went there were more questions, and there's still a lot of them. Certain things, we don't know. Like, okay, there was a living area there was a temple there. But then, they lived there for 200 years. Where did they come from? And where did they go? Who were they?
Or those are the questions, where they come from, where they go. I mean, where they came from, we don't actually know where they came from, because there's nothing older than the PKNA in the region. We have a few epipaleolithic sites in the Shannon-Gulfa region, but they're just sporadic, 2 or 3. But we have no other evidence. We don't know whether they came from the south, from the Natrukian sphere, from the Levant, or whether they came perhaps from the north. People have actually proposed that as well, based on lithics and various things. We don't actually know where they came from, but it seems that they appeared more or less like that with this technology. Of course, we can't rule out they're using wood before that, perhaps wooden T-pillars, but we don't know. I mean, this is something that we need to look into in more detail. But until we find the sites that predate Gobeklitepe, it's going to be difficult.
Because I was thinking, in this house where we had the Gobeklitepe, that was when we didn't have it. During the Ice Age, people lived there.
Well, they lived all over the place.
Yeah, and then it got flooded because of global warming.
Yeah.
Right? So people started moving north.
Oh, the reasons for migrations are...
It would be related
yeah.
to that. Well, I mean, it should be in 2,000 years.
Yeah, I mean, the occupation of Gobeklitepe, I mean, I wouldn't want to link it to any climate sort of... That sort of obviously, climate played a role in the early Holocene. Things did ameliorate, and there was, during the Younger Dryas, the end of the last ice age, it was, of course, drier than it was, and of course, in the early Holocene, we had the forest returning, etc. But that was a very slow process, obviously. So perhaps in a way, climate was a reason, but it'd be wrong, obviously, to argue in a monocausal way that climate caused the neolitization of the...
Another question I had there, I'm being a little bit long. There were these baseball-sized indentations.
Yeah.
Many of them looking towards the valley. And then I saw the same thing on the top of the T-head. What were those?
These cut marks, they appear on top of the T-pillars and also in the plateau as natural, and also they're actually worked and copied by humans. So some of actually they occur naturally in the limestone, these cut marks. But some of them are actually man-made as well.
Yeah.
And at all of these T-pillar sites, these cut marks actually appear. It's quite interesting. It's part of the limestone, and obviously it had some sort of significance to the people at the time. What the cut marks doing on top of the T-pillars, we don't know. Whether they're actually somehow associated with the roof construction, whether it was a time when the buildings were inundated, they were perhaps used as benches if they were sticking out. We don't actually know what they were used for. But as I say, cut marks do play a role. They are important for the site. But as for the ones on the T-pillars, we're not quite sure where they fit into the actual whole story of the buildings. Yes.
As I understand, you have several skulls.
Yeah.
So, did you try to make a reconstruction just to know what
Yeah.
brings the...
Yeah, they're very fragmentary. That's a problem, and we can't do facial. Oh, okay. So the question was whether the skulls have been up to facial reconstructions of the skulls we found at the site. Well, the thing is, the fragments of skull we have, they are highly fragmented, and we don't have a full skull. What we saw on the picture there was just sort of reconstructed. So the fragments are only there. So it's very difficult to actually make a facial or any sort of reconstruction based on those fragments. But we hope, when we have the ones from the burials, perhaps we can look at those, but I'm not quite sure. Regarding where race, I think we have to be careful with things like race and archaeology. Of course, we can't use that. We have to sort of I think what we're doing more today is looking at genetics, and genetics of the Neolithic is a very big area now starting out about tracing the DNA certain groups from Anatolia, from the core area of Neolithization into Europe, into Eurasia. That's starting to take off now. We know that the farmers going into southeastern Europe were of Anatolian origin to a greater extent, mixing them with local hunter-gatherer groups. So it's a very interesting new field of study, the DNA.
From the remains that has been found, what was the average size of a person at the time?
I've been told they were quite robust, whatever that might mean. I think they were quite sturdy individuals. Yeah, they were sturdy individuals. Of course, because we only have the skulls and also the fragmented bones, we haven't done much on that. But I've been told by our expert on the human bone that they were quite a sturdy group of people. But I don't have any data.
As their height?
Probably a bit smaller than us. I don't think I've been as big as me.
So if they were smaller than us, okay.
That's hypothetical, I don't have the data. But
Right. How do you propose that all of this was moved?
I think we have these buildings were centuries in existence, and they were piecemeal. I mean, obviously they were done to a plan, and I really think you don't need the thousands of people envisaged for this. I mean, if you did have thousands of people there, I think probably 5% did the work and the rest parted. I really think a small group is to see and be seen, I think. And I think the work itself would have been quite feasible with a small group of specialists, and they would have done a good job. We have to get our students out and do some, see how long it takes them to carve a teapot. But I honestly think it would have been accomplishable by a small group of experts, hardy experts, and quick. I mean, even today with our local workforce, if I ask them, can you move a stone for me that's rather big, they get the wood out, set up the tripod, and it's in a jiffy it's gone. And you can't forget these were clever guys and strong guys, and I think, as I say, the group would have been quite small. And if they did have these big meetings for the construction of these buildings, it would have been more for the party than for the work itself.
I must ask how they got to be smarter than others. What was the population in that region that attended?
Yeah, I mean, that's again hard to say because we don't have all the sites. The problem is, of course, we have the Tepe sites that I showed you known from the surface surveys, but of course, down in the plain, where people would have been active as well, there's so much sediment built up over the years of alluviation that we don't know where the sites are. But they would have been down there as well, I'm quite sure. That's where the gazelle was. Gazelle was the most important quarry, and the most important source of meat, and they would have chased them around, and the aurochs and the wild boar, that would have been the place for the hunting. And for that reason, they'd been down there as well. I think that the landscape would have been populated to what extent, to how many, I can't give you a number of individuals per hectare, but it would be noticeable. And of course, as I said, there was an increasing population because of the sedentism, because of having more children. We must expect that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you talked about core-built roofing, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think the material of those bigger circular sites are?
They're all limestone. It's all limestone.
Even the roofing?
The roofing would have been wood. I mean, today the landscape's quite barren, but that comes from decades, centuries, millennia of grazing the goats and that. And now, of course, more recently through the irrigation, through the dams and the reservoirs, more fields coming in, and all remaining trees more or less. I mean, it's quite treeless there, there's a few bushes, but it's a great extent there. But at the time, it would have been, there have been wood available, oak, wild almond, wild pistachio, which is, it would have been a different landscape, and wood would have been available. The question is to what extent, I can't really say that. I say it's an area that we're looking into more detail now. We have a new team from the Freie Universität in Berlin who's looking at the erosion and climate record, paleoclimate records. So we hope that we'll have more information on that in the future. But yeah, the roofs would have been a mixture of wood, stone, rubble, that sort of thing. You have a question?
One more question, perhaps, and then yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think there would have been animosity, there would have been territoriality, would have been an increasing problem also with population increasing. We have no physical evidence for intergroup conflict. There is a site further east in the Tigris region which is also contemporaneous with Gobeklitepe called Tepe, and we do have burials from there where we do have evidence, according to my colleagues from the University of UHCL, we do have evidence for increased healed wounds, especially bashes to the head, that sort of thing. So they weren't totally free of violence, but the question is, I don't think it was intergroup, or we don't have evidence of intergroup conflict between different settlements, but perhaps internal sort of strife going on there. And of course that would be an indication for the mounting pressures of neolithization, I think, of these changing lifeways. For millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years you're a hunter-gatherer, and all of a sudden you're faced with these new challenges of becoming a sedentary farmer. It's something that probably be a challenge for most of us. Well, yeah, it's like me with computers, I think. I haven't hit anyone yet. No.
Thank you very much. Again, this is like 3 lectures in 3 days, and you still go on energetically. I mean, only scholarly passion and dedication can explain this energy. Thanks again for being with us tonight and staying till the end. And I hope that you are leaving tonight with so many foods for thought. And also, literally, we have so many leftover food there too. Please grab some food as you move out. And other than that, please have a great day, Corona-free days. And then I hope to see you again in another event. Thank you very much again. Good night.